Good afternoon, everyone. Gareth Presch, founder of the World Health Innovation Summit. Delighted that you could join us on a Friday afternoon. I'm joined by Dr. Tom Ashfield, who is stateside at the moment. Tom, you're very welcome. Please, short introduction for those who have just joined us, and for those who've listened in to the last two episodes of Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. I'm delighted that this is our third discussion of 4.
Yeah, great. It's good to see you again. It makes sense for us to be international, right? To think about supply chains. It just makes you think a bit different when you're in another place. And there's a lot happening in this sphere at the moment, particularly around antimicrobials and supply of those. The other important events coming up, we have an AMR conference in Philadelphia next week, and that's why I'm actually over here. And then in 3-4 weeks, we have the UN General Assembly meeting on AMR in New York. So there is a heap of stuff going on for me at the moment. And it's a delight to start thinking about this, because this is something this is key to resolution of a lot of healthcare systems as we think about supply chain in different ways. And Gareth, in terms of how things have been going from your side with WHIS, what's been happening?
Oh, well, we've just been really busy. We actually, next week is a bit of a momentous week. We have a new director of partnerships starting next week. I'll keep that under wraps. I'll give people I'm just letting it out of the bag slightly today, but we're going to make an announcement next week. So we've got a new strategic partnerships director coming in, which is going to be transitional for us as we start to grow the business. We had World Health Innovation Day, which was a big success. Thanks to everyone who joined in. We had people all over the world, Kenya, Europe, America. It was a fantastic launch. Next year's date is set, so I think we have it down as the 2nd of August next year, so 2025. So please mark that day. I've been planning our online event, which is our digital WIS for November 29th. Mark that in your calendar. So working on the speakers, but also I'm preparing, like yourself, Tom, for a General Assembly, which is around the corner. I've been busy working with the Commonwealth on our new Commonwealth Fund. We're also working on the African side. So lots and lots of things happening. And I'm just delighted that we're able to catch up again. Looking forward to this discussion on supply chain. But before we get into that, there's a couple of things that have come up during the week that you may have seen. The first thing I think we have to talk about is the suicide report that came out from the Office of National Statistics during the week, which was very alarming. I mean, the question for me, Tom, are we seeing the collapse of mental health services? I mean, the disparity between the North and South divide is quite alarming.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had the rumblings of people knowing we've got to reform the services around this and to increase awareness. But I think we need a total radical new approach to how we think about this, because the key is connection. So the key to this happening is through resolving connection with people. And I think that the more isolated nature of life these days is a huge contributor to this. The other thing, as I often say this, is it's very difficult. We talk about suicide awareness, but everything I'm doing at the moment, and we will do this today with the supply chain too, is thinking around the individual transaction. The person that is intent on doing this will not tell anyone. So it's very difficult to become aware of people that are intent on doing it. So the work has to go around weeks, months, years, the whole life of connecting with your family, with your friends. And that's what it comes down to. And then the other thing I would like to think about is the words as well. Mental health, cardiovascular health is a good thing to have. Mental health is a good thing to have, right? So I think we need to think more about emotional states, crisis, and connection. And I think those things capture what happens for people on a day-to-day basis when they're struggling, much more than it does to say mental health. It doesn't really mean much. It's very confusing. So we need to get very specific, like we would with an infection. We say there's AMR, but we have to be specific about particular problems within that to really address it. Because if we just say we're going to throw money or resource at mental health, I never know what that actually means.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this, Gareth?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, my thoughts have always been you've got to start, early. We developed these programs in Cumbria that were very successful, our Wish Kids programs. Unfortunately, we had to take a step back during COVID because we weren't in a position to kind of deploy them further. But we're going to start to ramp those up. But I agree. I mean, you have to take that whole holistic approach. I mean, I'm always of the opinion, maybe, you like you say, you need to maybe reframe it, mental health, mental wellness, how do we begin to, and also it's how do we actually support those people who are in the most need, like you said, a lot of people who are in need, they probably don't come forward. And so it's recognizing those signs. And I think it's very, very difficult, but the most important thing is to recognize that there is a fault, and clearly the numbers that have come out during the week are alarming, and hopefully that starts the debate around how do we change, but we have to acknowledge there's a problem. Unless we acknowledge there's a problem, we can't solve it. So, but I think we could spend, the entire session just on mental health and well-being. And I think, we can go deeper into that. But
I think probably we should. I think we should probably do another one sometime because it's just so important. I can definitely take a link through this. Definitely. I think we really need to spend some time on it. I think the sensible link in practice, I would say that so if we think about supply chain, for somebody that's having struggles that may be on an antidepressant, within this, that it sometimes happens for antidepressants, but rarely. What is evident is that there's more and more people on them, and we've still got issues. So we need to really look at that, and that we must look at holistically. So within the supply chain or the resources that are actually delivered to the patient, I think it's really important to know it's not just about the tablet that we're getting through, but actually I need a plentiful supply of therapists and therapy modalities that are way beyond just CBT. There is an undoubted need now for trauma embedded services, not just trauma informed, but embed trauma as the key to why people are actually distressed enough to do this. And then if we think about supply chains within this too, for depression, if we think about the antidepressants, I could probably prioritize the ones that are most important. If I had a list of 5 of them and I had to choose one to go out of stock, there's one I would say I don't want that one to go out, because actually the withdrawal and the potential is much more severe than the others. So we can then think about prioritization, because the people managing these supply chain issues across the world and infrastructure, they're under a tremendous pressure in industry and in governments to maintain these things that are plentiful and there for the patients. The other thing I can then sort of think about in my life was the HRT supplies. This was classically always an issue. There's a few things you can always remember about 25 years ago that are always often out of stock. One of those was HRT of all manner. The other was eardrops. They often go in and out, and you just don't know which one's there. You spend loads of time thinking, and there's a lot of wasted time. Interestingly, the HRT issue, we know that these are ostensibly policy issues, because it required high-level policy intervention for that to be really, really addressed. And thankfully now that the problem is not so much there. It still is there to some extent, but it needed everybody around the same table saying, okay, we're going to speak about, starting from the patient's story, the person's story, that there's a need to address women's health, overarching, a bit like your structure really. There's a need to for health in general, and then bring it down to women's health. And then we bring it down to, there is a need here within menopause, diagnosis, treatment, understanding. And then you could have gone through all of that, which is complicated enough, but then to then have the person really hopeful and then be chasing around pharmacies all over the country was really challenging. So there is optimism in how things can be resolved. And I guess then the modern one we think about is also the GLP-1 analogs and weight loss and diabetes uses. That's been a topical one recently. Any experiences for you, Gareth, on
Well,
this?
yeah, I mean, like I've worked in supply chain. You know, I used to work on the Haemophilia Product Selection Monitoring Advisory Board. That's a mouthful for those who are listening in. And yeah, we always made sure that the supply chain was adequate. You know, I think you know, any contracts we signed, but I'm not sure that many of the other areas were as robust as our, shall we say, procurement process, because it was very robust. It was, you know, and again, I think policy like enforce that robustness because of the contaminated blood products scandal in the 70s and 80s, which made it, you know, sort of like high on the agenda for the government. So we had like a dedicated procurement officer, and you know, it was really well managed. But I think I just wanted to try and give a bit of a high level overview here. You know, like there is supply chain issues in Europe, but there's serious supply chain issues in Africa and in Latin America and across the world. And then, of course, like that leads into problems with antimicrobial resistance. And, you know, Tom, maybe you could just give a bit of a summary, you know, a sort of like a snapshot. And then also, like, where do you think the opportunities are here? Because one of the things when you look at, like, say, Africa for development aid and for supply chain, and you look, like, you know, the mpox is an example. Like, you know, all the vaccines have to be flown in there. You know, they have to be, you know, they have to be donated from you know, from countries who are willing to donate mpox vaccines. So we do have a massive supply chain issue. Like, how do we address that? I've put a couple of questions to you there.
Yeah, no, this is it's so important. I always think that infection prevention and treatment always leads the way in our understanding of crises. They follow natural disasters. They follow geopolitical issues all the time. So I know personally in my view that this is always the top of the pile to sort first. You can't do anything without a clean hospital, clean water, and the ability to treat or prevent infection. None of the rest happens. So it's the top of the chain, the supply chain. It really must be prioritized. Now, there was an issue back in 2017 where the factory that produces the active ingredient, the API for piptaz, which is piperacillin tazobactam, this went out. There was a fire at the factory. Now, this caused shockwaves across the world, and probably more so than we could actually measure, because people had to switch from this workhorse antibiotic that's used in hospitals to other options. And you know, we think also that there are impacts on people getting higher rates of C. diff. So it's really important. Now, the Wellcome Trust thankfully did an analysis of the supply chains for some common antibacterials a few years ago. And we can see there that there's things that we do know and there's things we also don't know. Within the fragmented nature of production and licensing across the world, it can be quite difficult to even know for a company's own product where everything is being made. So we must think also within a vial of medicine that then gets to sub-Saharan Africa, where that's actually come from. It's going to have a glass vial, it's going to have a rubber stopper, it's going to be in a sterile environment, it's going to have excipients, it's going to have the active ingredient in there, it's going to have testing, packaging. I can't imagine that's happening in the same place. And so the ecological burden, the carbon burden of this is absolutely massive. So bring it back to what we're thinking here is this is very much at the heart of what I'm writing about with a number of wonderful minds at the moment around defining antimicrobials or working antimicrobials as infrastructure. So common pool resources, because they actually meet the definition of this for certain. So really thinking about it like a bridge, you can't really get over the river without a bridge there, but you need to use it appropriately. You don't need 10 in the same place. So how do you appropriately use your antimicrobials? You treat them and you think about them as infrastructure. And we can apply that to other medicines as well and other devices. There are some that are definitely enabling the rest of the system. As we start to think about that, a country's understanding of what's infrastructure for itself can realize new economies. So something that is possible is either the transfer of licenses to allow regionalized production or supply chains, and that will have a direct benefit on the sustainable development goals as well. So because you'll have productivity and employment and responsible use. So in terms of thinking about how we think about antimicrobial resistance, we can switch it on its head and think about how do we think about the opposite of that, of working antibiotics? Because most of the world, most of the time, is running on these antibiotics that are working amazingly well. The issue in most of the world is actually contagion and lack of access. So there are issues, but they can't get the medicines to the sites. They can't get that. So how do we resolve access in some places and then overconsumption in another place? We can start to think about them as infrastructure that you have to look after. You have to maintain your bridge or your fire extinguisher, but you also have to have a supply and you have to get it to the place that it's needed. So like you are doing conceptually for a long time before everything started running like it is now and you're recruiting, it's about changing mindsets really clearly and then just repeating it consistently. Is there anything that, I guess this fits in with WHS? I'm looking at your logo behind us actually, and it looks like a supply chain, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's basically what we're, where I'm looking at it from my perspective is like the opportunity when you look at, okay, what do you need to enable the infrastructure? So you're going to need skills, training, development, education. I had a call yesterday with a number of educational providers who are working in 12 sub-Saharan African countries. We were talking about how do you, engage the workforce? How do you build that up? I've spoken to a number of pharmaceutical companies in the past around, how could you build that infrastructure? And what was concerning them was like, well, who are the bricklayers? Who are going to, where do you get your, your pharmacists from? Where, you need the schools, the education system, and then the investment flows, you have to have the plan. So there is a lot of work, I think, that has to go into that. I think we're slightly vulnerable in terms of like, at the moment, supply chains are not as rigid as they should be, and geopolitics is playing is playing its part there as well. So I think we need to be mindful of that. What I'm excited about is the fact that, like, when you look to the future of healthcare and you look at a preventative healthcare model, you're going to start to develop new nutritional products and services. And again, these will create new jobs and new opportunities. Again, you're going to need the infrastructure, you're going to need a supply chain. But I think one of the things, I guess, and you're probably noticing it at these conferences, and that is there is localized supply chain now. So supply chains are being withdrawn from certain regions, and they're going to start and open up opportunities locally. So that's probably what you're noticing,
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And this is it. If we think about the products that have to be distributed around the world, a good example is Shionogi cefiderocol. Now, this is a product that is in need around the planet, was launched in developed markets, and then there is a commitment for them to make sure that's accessible to other countries in the world, many LMICs. Now, to achieve that, they partnered with GARD-P to understand how and link with distributors across the world that can actually be achieved. And there again, that reflects the WHIS approach is collaboration. And then coming back to infrastructure theory, common pool resources and the tragedy of the commons, basically that implies you have to have everybody investing time, resource, money. It's not just governments, it's not just industry, it's not just non-profits, it's actually everything. As we start to get a list of infrastructure and know what our priorities is. So I'd say the first thing to do is probably prioritize per region. This is done by the WHO for the aware antibiotics. That's a global list of those that need to be accessed across the planet. And they're doing the right thing by setting that. What I think we then miss out on, and this then meets us back to what you said about, is regionalizing understanding. Now, the priority pathogens list as well by WHO states those that are the most threatening infections to the planet. And again, that is very useful to understand a global need, but really supply chain doesn't think that we're delivering them from Mars to the planet. Supply chain is about delivering them to all manner of all areas, right? So we must, I think, regionalize our priorities as well. So if we looked at sub-Saharan Africa, we go, well, what are the actual priorities here? But then we actually take it down really to others. And it could be that supply chain for some things are actually quite good and plentiful for some issues. And for others, there might be, we might say, well, actually the priority here is the clean water tomorrow. So I think it's a priority list first.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, and then like there's a couple of questions I have for you, but you know, when you look at illicit trade, you know, so obviously there's a lot of drugs that are sold on the black market. I mean, these again are huge problems, you know, and they're supply chain driven because there's a demand and the market is there. So, I mean, these are, I mean, I think in the likes of Africa, you know, you've tens of thousands of children annually who die due to illicit drugs. So these are huge problems that we need to address. Is there any sort of like movement on that you can see? Are we working towards to addressing those issues? Because of course that leads to infection.
Yeah, it does. And the other flip side of that is there will be within it, there will be infections that are appropriately treated through them as well. Sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are some places that are actually depending on this route of supply to keep people well as well. So it's a mixture. It's there's two sides to the coin. This makes it very challenging. I think then the priority is to think about what's actually on the ground first. What are people consuming? So what is actually in them? It could be that there's actually nothing in it of any use. And it could be 10% of it, or it could be a toxic dose. So the most important thing is to verify what is actually on the ground in these places. And again, if you did that with a priority, if you think about your 5 most used medicines per country, and I think this is what we should do, is think, what are your 5 top medicines to do? Let's do a screening in the local area to see what's coming through, you know, through illicit part and what is actually in that, do some assays, and then find out, is there a supply chain issue? Because clearly there's either a false supply chain of something that's a false product, or this is actual product that's entered the wrong route and is being sold in an illicit way. So it needs a lot of analysis, and that has been done in a number of places. Now, interestingly, we need to think also about selling over the counter, even from the places that are, you know, respected. So a pharmacy selling antibiotics, for example, or anything else, then that's also happening. So although it's not necessarily illicit, it might not be appropriate. Now, places like you have states in India that have actually moved over now. So Kerala have actually banned the sale of over-the-counter antibiotics. These are great moves. And once you get that within a region, you must spread that within your country, and then hopefully to neighboring states as well. So it's a supremely complex issue, and it also, you know, it's a threat to the intellectual property of people that are developing these new things as well, to think, well, if we'll do it, but then it's just going to be packaged up as something, as an imitation. That's a really big issue. So any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it's a challenge. I think it'll become even more challenging. I know technology is going to play a role. You know, there's the deployment of these, you know, sort of like mobile boots that are being deployed all over the world now. You know, and some of them are dispensing medicines. You know, so you know, I've seen these boots that, you know, at any trade show or, you know, recent conference. I was in Helsinki a couple of weeks back, and, you know, they had them there. They're great solutions. You know, they're sort of like a you know, a digital health sort of like module where people can get a bit of treatment and they can also get some advice, but then they can dispense as well. So I think they can always be counted, you know, they can be misused. So there's challenges there. I think so just going back to sort of like the next couple of weeks in terms of UN General Assembly, antimicrobial resistance is on the agenda. supply chain is no doubt part of that, and sustainable development. Is there anything that we need to be looking out for? Is there anything that people can see as an opportunity? I mean, we've spoken about the huge challenges that the healthcare system faces at the moment. What's your thoughts on UNGA? Will it deliver? I mean, I'm looking forward to it myself, but I think there's got to be action,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's everybody that's involved in this sector is, having some very busy weeks. Colleagues at the British Society of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy are going to be there, and they're going to be presenting wounds that won't heal, which is pictorial representation of what actually is happening because of AMR, because it's quite a nebulous issue. People can find it very difficult to relate. What does that actually mean? So personal stories are very important. I'd say it's really important also to people to channel into how their family, their lives, and services are actually enabled by working antibiotics. So flip it on its head and not think so existentially down the line, not think about so much projection, but actually think today and in the past, what's actually enabled me to be well because of these, and then how much do we value those medicines. The other thing is thinking about how we talk about this investment. I actually believe very, very strongly that antimicrobial policy and this infrastructure theory is a way that we could completely change how we talk about investment into drug pipelines and into how medicines are distributed, monitored, and used. And then we can start to really imagine a different way. It's almost taking a leap to understand around this. And there's so many positive externalities involved in good healthcare. And that's exactly what WHIS do, right? You realize that, you realize the productivity, you realize that this then links to many other things. With antimicrobial resistance, for example, having working antimicrobials assures us food security, biosecurity. And we then bring that to the WHIS model that actually healthy, well people working in health systems, outside of health systems, in society, keep productivity going, they keep things working, and that's linked to many things economically, including pension security. So, yeah, I think it's intimately linked with your model. In terms of what other things to look out for, the MSCI, I went to their investment forum the other day, which was an amazing day. I noticed that maybe 3 years ago, I knew of maybe 5 investment houses that had this, that were actually talking about this. And it was standing room only. So yes, there's now a need for us to translate from panic to opportunity. And that's going to be the theme of this. And we want buy-in from as many countries, states, companies, so that we really have a common pool approach to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that struck me during the week when I had a conversation with an investors was to do with energy. And, when you talk about supply chain, and of course you have to have the infrastructure in place, which you're talking about, but energy security is critical as well, because you need the energy, the electricity needs to flow into the manufacturing process, and that was one of the conversations we were having, was around how do you build out that infrastructure, because that's critical infrastructure that defines quite a lot. And a lot of people won't think, well, what's energy got to do with getting my vial or my AMR prescription, or my antibiotic? These are sort of things we take for granted, but in emerging lower middle income countries, these are critical infrastructures. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. I'm looking forward to UNGA. I mean, you've got your conference next week, which builds you on the momentum there. What else have you got on just to share with everyone before we wrap up? I think we've kind of covered supply chain today. I don't know, but tell us what's your next few weeks looking like. You explained you've got next week's conference.
Yeah, it's quite a lot going on. Yeah, so publications are going well. There's been some nice things cohesing on this. So I'm working from the sort of the patient story. So what I'm really talking about, just like we did with the suicide awareness and emotional well-being, is we must translate up from individual patient interaction all the way up to scale of populations. And that's informing a lot of what I'm doing. So what's of value to the patient in the room at that point? And I think that's where we align on. So I've had some really positive moves around that in terms of care planning and making sure we do our due diligence for people that are at risk of serious disease, all the way up the scale to global definitions of antimicrobial efficacy as infrastructure. And this is my absolute passion at the moment. And I've delighted to have been invited to speak to University of Villanova law students within the health department at the University of Villanova. That's on Tuesday. I need to write that today. I know exactly what I'm going to talk about, this infrastructural theory. And I really want them and the hive mind to contribute and to come back to us to think about, well, what would be all of the potential issues or even perverse incentives around doing something new. We have to think every time that we're doing something, what are the perverse incentives? And we had that then, which you talked about with the supply chain, right? You know, you can go and iterate and get a new drug on the market, but actually, is that going to develop a new economy of illicit supplies of things that are good? We saw that again with we've seen that with the GLP-1 analogs recently, right? So you've got to be very aware. I think pragmatism, optimism with skepticism and not cynicism. Because if you go to cynicism, you don't trust humans at all. If you maintain those other three, you're like, okay, I can balance. Let's be practical.
Brilliant. Well, look, we've got one more session this year that we have. It's enablement. What does value mean for citizens, communities, investment, and industry on September 13th, 1 p.m. If anyone wants any more details, go to our website. But that's going to be an interesting discussion because I think, that's pre-Unga as well. I'm excited for that one. What's your thoughts? What are we going to get into there?
Well, I guess I gave a little sneak of it there of this thinking around enablement is thinking about the individual patient or group transactions, thinking about what value represents for people in the moment. And that again, you can see that. I keep looking at the infographic from behind you, actually. And and this is where it literally sings enablement to me. I can see academia, science, discovery, life, mindfulness, families, discussion, collaboration. So I guess in a way we could maybe start by talking about that and how you came up with it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's part of our thesis. That's part of our sort of like our model. But look, Tom, I think on a Friday afternoon and it's early morning where you are, we'll wrap this up. It's been a fascinating discussion. I hope people have enjoyed this discussion. This was our third one. I wish you all the best in Philadelphia and next week. And of course, on the road to Unga, and I'll see you on the 13th.
Yeah, you too. I know. I mean, I'm looking forward to this announcement to see WHIS expanding, and actually, this is now really happening. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's exciting times. I mean, we've been working hard behind the scenes, and there's lots and lots of things happening that I haven't been able to share, which I will be able to share. There's lots of things coming forward. I'm excited over the next couple of months, years. What we're trying to build is like the future of healthcare here. We're kind of trying to transition from managing disease to prevention at scale, with some amazing meetings during the week across Europe. I won't say any countries, but there have been some good discussions going on. And I'm very excited to share that over the next couple of weeks and looking forward to seeing you on the 13th. But for everyone who's joined us today, thanks so much. If you've listened to this on record, I hope this has been worth your time. But we'll catch up with you on the 13th of September for our last and final session. So for myself and Tom, we'll wish you all the best and have a great weekend.
Good weekend. Many thanks.